the first two segments that I recorded, the audio didn't record, so I'm just going to chop this up, put this before the video, let you guys know what's going on. What you hear while I do have the video, and that will be sped up, even though I said I don't like it, and I do have some replacement audio, and that's what you're hearing. So yeah.
There is a house down in New Orleans that they call the Rising Sun, and it's been the ruin of many poor boys, and I, oh Lord, am one. Just fill those glasses to the brim. Let those strings go merrily around, and we'll drink to the health of the round poor boy who goes from town to town. Well, the only thing that Rounder needs is a suitcase and a trunk, and the only time he's satisfied is when he's on the drunk. Oh, girls, don't believe what a man tells you, though his eyes be blue or brown, unless he's on a scaffold up high, saying, girls, oh, I can't come down. Go tell my youngest brother not to do the things I've done, but to shun that house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. Oh, I'm going back to New Orleans, for my race is nearly run. Gonna spend the rest of my wicked old life beneath that rising sun.
Yeah, so I am going to get back to some of the things I talked about, and you can hear. I just wanted to say the stuff I've been doing on the watercolor. I laid yellow and blue layers, I think mostly blue layers on these twigs. I laid a bunch of yellow over the magenta, because this spot's eventually going to be black. I just wanted to point out this area, just for your information. It got damaged moving the paper around. It's got a chunk out of it, but it doesn't seem to be affecting the absorption of the paper, which is nice. Sometimes the sizing can get messed up, and that really affects how the piece looks. And that doesn't seem to be the case with this. So I'm going to talk in a truncated fashion about what I talked about when the audio was lost, and I'll think about what I want to carry over, what I missed later. I'm going to let's see. I think I want to do more yellow. Like I said, it's kind of weak, and I want to really build it up in certain areas of the drawing. So I sort of talked about three connected topics. I talked about George Orwell, I talked about honesty, and I talked about sort of general, it was more specific, but like a general discussion of yourself as a political entity, like how you, the consistency that you need to develop if you want people to take you seriously politically, and if you want to make sure you're only keeping the best ideas, and you are. So I guess the assumption politically is that everybody wants to make things better, and that's sort of and it could be better in a very narrow sense. It could be better for them, but generally people probably perceive what they're doing as making the world better, and that is a thing to understand, because if you're just attacking people's motivations, and you're attacking people's intent, and you don't know what that intent is, and all you're doing is attacking the inside of somebody's mind that you can't see, when there are substantive things that you can attack, it's just not very helpful. And so why I wanted to talk about Orwell is because of any writer I've read, Orwell it's like he's an exemplar of this quality of honesty and self-criticism, and sort of he said it's almost like I think it was published kind of in book form, but it's available as an essay online. Oh no, sorry, I'm talking about Those Were the Days, which is about him at school, but that's not actually. It's in Why I Write was one of his essays. And he says that he writes to advance the cause of democratic socialism, that he sees art as propaganda, and that everything he lays to paper is for these reasons. He talks about why people write, and he's very honest for the reasons why people write. I mean, it's fame, it's having people know who you are, and... Oh, drop some paint. And he's not trying to pretend that it's anything different. And so... I think a lot of people have read Animal Farm, have read 1984. I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about his essays. This is what I'm using to hold paint, by the way. I'm just adding some yellow, so I figured and in specifically two of his essays, Why I Write, like I already mentioned, and Politics in the English Language. And I guess why I am so big on Orwell is because I feel like he demonstrates, like I said, the ethical quality of his thoughts and what he was worried about and what he really saw as disgusting and evil, namely imperialism and fascism, thought control, destruction of objective reality. Actually, one thing 1984 is very much about is the state controlling how people have sex and how people have relationships with each other, and how that's changed the face of the whole society. And yeah, I think Orwell. So, and this is going to go in sort of different directions than it did before, but Orwell in Politics in the English Language says something that if you are an educated person, probably seems like magic or false or impossible, which is that he says that people bemoan the changes in our language, but they say that it's an inevitability and nothing can be done, and he says that that's not true. He says we can. He says this is affecting how we think, this is affecting how we form our opinions and hold our positions, and you can be careful with your thought and be careful specifically with what you say to improve the public discourse. And I think right now we have a president who brags about having not read books. That's pretty major, which is to say this yellow. But that other thing's major too. And the way to, if you are concerned about the turn in politics towards the Donald Trump sort of paradigm, the way to defeat that is not to act like him. You don't attack him personally. You attack his ideas. You attack the maybe the integrity he's shown as like a public person, but what I'm thinking about is the Stephen Colbert talking basically. So he talks about like Trump's genitals. They talk about Trump's genitals. I see that's big. But the thing Stephen Colbert did was that he called Donald Trump President Putin's cock holster, and it's like, okay, so is that an insult? Because are you insulting this person by calling him gay? Is this really? Is this liberalism? Is this the left? Because it doesn't seem consistent at all. And my explanation for this is Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, these people are not political leaders. They don't care. This is not their job. They're not concerned about the polity. They might be concerned about the polity, but what they're concerned about is their careers and how they see them. And they're not going to change that. They exist in the context they exist in. They're probably going to continue to exist in that. And Stephen Colbert is on a late night show, and it's just you can't only get your information from people who are making comedy. And the reasons for this are you get the version of the story that sounds the best. You get the version of the story that invokes the most outrage. You get the version of the story that's the most salacious, and you don't necessarily get anything that's particularly close to the truth. And I think a lot of this is going to end up really negatively affecting liberal ideas in the long term. You're already sort of seeing, I have seen online people tying together the question on gender with global warming. So they say, oh yeah, scientists can't even tell me how many genders there are, and I'm supposed to believe that I'm going to change the weather 100 years from now, is more or less what I saw. This is a fallacy. This is a poor argument, but this is going to convince people. This is going to change their minds. And that's the thing. You can't say that one thing is scientifically basically verifiable, global warming, and then just apply that. Say, we're on the side of scientists, therefore we get to say whatever we want is scientifically proven even when it's not. It is not scientifically proven that there are 67 genders. It's probably not scientifically proven. It's scientifically proven there's two sexes, but you can't throw out social policy and expect people to go along with it, especially when there's a long history in the United States of psychology in particular inspiring damaging legislation and laws. Homosexuality. Psychologists said in the 1960s that was mental illness. In the war in Iraq, a huge part of the justification of torture came from the APA board, the American Psychiatric Association, and this is deeply problematic. These are not... So, science is a distrust of authority. You hear people phrasing it like that, and it really is true. You can't just take what people say to you as gospel, because the people saying that stuff to you aren't the people who probably have the most correct views at the time, because who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe a person who spends their life trying to make the world a better place, like a doctor in Doctors Without Borders? Or are you going to trust Cenk Uygur, whose job is to make money? Are you going to trust Tucker Carlson? Are you going to trust whatever? And it's okay if they're making money through this way. I don't mean if your money, all your funding is transparent and it's coming from your viewership, like let's say Democracy Now!, it's much less problematic. You understand what their position is and where they're coming from, but you never know where it might change with people who use online ads and people who rely on ad revenue. And I think we're seeing a huge change. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people who aren't the best political speakers, who don't have the most refined opinions, and who haven't spent the most time thinking about these things that they should, but people still respond to them, and people still listen to what they have to say and discuss these things with them, because they put themselves forward more or less honestly, and they don't try to hide views they have. And I mean, this is where we have to get as a species. You can't be afraid of what people think about you, because there's so many people. If you put yourself online, there's going to be someone who thinks any possible thing about you. And it's just power of large numbers. You just can't allow yourself to be intimidated by things people might say, by thoughts. But I mean, you can't. It's like you're extending thought crime against yourself. It's like, oh, I don't want to think that because people might think I'm a racist. I don't want to think that because people might think I'm a sexist. And I think people who are racists are people who identify primarily with a racial group and pull their policy forward as a member of that group. So if you are a white nationalist and that's your politics, and you want to make a white ethno-state, you see the world primarily through a filter of race. Congratulations, you're a racist. But if you also think that the end-all and be-all of all politics starts and ends with race, and you criticize or support people based on their race, and you think that if people aren't a particular race, they can't talk on particular issues, congratulations, you're also a racist. And so here I go, I'm generically calling people racists after saying it's so problematic, but all being a racist is thinking that race is a primary determinative factor in life, in our physical reality. And it could be perceived race, could be a factor in some parts of the country, and it definitely is, and the criminal justice this criminal justice system definitely disproportionately jails blacks and Latinos, I think. But I don't think to the extent that they disproportionately jail blacks. And they and so that's the thing. You can acknowledge these realities, and they are realities, and that doesn't mean the people involved are trying to make racist policy. It's too simple. It's too easy. If you can dismiss everything someone's saying because of their association with a particular person, and you don't have to listen to their positions, then you're not doing your due diligence as a citizen, and you're letting down your democracy. And yeah, I mean, that's not great. One of the things I talked about before, when the audio is lost, and I can talk about again, sort of how it ties to Orwell, is honesty and the importance of honesty, and why it is almost Sam Harris calls it something like the virtue upon which other virtues hinge on, and I think that's pretty true. I think there's a thing people in social science say where you can't maximize for two variables at once. People probably say this in science. I mean, because it's true. If I want the biggest tank, it's not going to be the fastest tank. It's not going to be the tank with the best gun. It's going to be the biggest tank. And I think the same thing is true in an abstract. But I think that if you maximize for being a good person or maximize for being an honest person, that the difference is very small. And you're going to get very far in trying to be a better person if you try to make your life more honest, if you try to live life more honestly. One thing I wanted to talk about in regards to that is there's a lot of contexts in which people are sort of forced to more or less live dishonestly. It's either the jobs they have, retail's maybe a good example, or salesmanship. A lot of people feel like they have to be dishonest to keep their jobs. And I also wanted to discuss the difference between I've sort of like everyone always like seems to come up with pet terminology for different stuff, and so just keep that in mind. And I'm talking about the difference between what I'm calling the emotional honesty, which is sort of feeling like your intent was all right, and therefore you were in the right, but you were actively spreading misinformation, you were lying to people, maybe because you thought they would feel better. And then intellectual honesty, where you can write down, you can diagram logically what you're saying, and it makes sense, it's consistent, and it's honest. And you really want to be intellectually honest, because there's so many ways you could be. Okay, let's say I ask my husband, do I look good in this dress as a man? And he says, no, like, you look like crap. you're overweight, or no, you look like crap, your skin's in terrible condition, you should do something about that. Is it worse that he says that to me? Or is it worse that he says that to me, or should he lie to me, and then as a partnership, as two people working to survive the world together, we'll just never come to this problem because he can't tell me, hey, like, I'm concerned about your health, or hey, I'm concerned about maybe just the way you present yourself, or these discussions that you can have with people where people in your life could be doing things you understand to be ethically questionable. And I guess the do I look fat isn't a great example, except, well, I'll get back to that. People will do things that you think are ethically questionable because they're trying to protect what they think are people's feelings. Why I don't think the fat thing's problematic is we live in a society where most people are, maybe not most people, a huge proportion of people are visibly unhealthy, and we have people that don't want to make people feel bad are nice about it, but then there's also an industry which is trying to keep people fat, keep people sick, keep people controllable and predictable. Because when every year you're fatter and you're closer to diabetes, you only have one real option. You have to trust doctors. You have to let other people take your health into their hands if you can't do it yourself. And that constricts your freedom. It makes your life worse. It's going to be difficult for the people around you. Whereas if you take accountability for it, it's not going to be, you have more ways that you can go about solving the problem. And so the thing with the fat acceptance, where I'm saying this is an industry and you're trying to keep people fat, is, I mean, people weren't morbidly obese. 30% of people weren't morbidly obese in the 50s. It is simply a marketing scam. It is an absurdity to accept this reality as reality. You don't have precedence for it in societies. You had people that were fat before, but not like this, and it's not, and there's a lot of fallacies that's based on, which I'm going to dry this paper off, and I'll get back to that a little bit. Coolio. So, sort of finishing up, I'm going to put some blue. I'm going to try to make this line more defined. So I'm going to put blue around it. It's going to be kind of involved. I'm using a fake sable brush. I like it. It's a synthetic sable. It's made by a company. They're marketed under Mimic Kolinsky. Mimic with a K. If you search that online, you can find them. So back to what I was talking about. And I guess why I talk with such emphasis, and I suppose without fear that people will think I'm a monster, and I mean, people kind of are monsters, but without people that will fear I'm some sort of special monster, or that I don't care, I suppose, if they fear that I'm a monster, is I, myself, as I mentioned in a previous video, was quite the bonsai fatty. And I had it was because I was raised by a family that didn't really understand nutrition, and that is going to happen when there's no education about it, and when people go out of their way to lie to you about it. Like, what I'm thinking about specifically is the low-fat movement in the 90s, which is based on falsified research, and probably made a lot of people diabetic. And I guess that's the big thing, is this, when I'm talking about how people haven't looked like this forever. You've always had fat people, you've always had people with congenital disorders that caused them to put on more weight, but it just didn't look the same, and there weren't as many people, and there's all these ideas people have of why they're overweight that are just wrong. People think they're overweight because they eat too much, and that's horse shit. People are overweight because sugar is poison. I mean, to save you some time, the thing that caused me to lose weight is I one day, searched YouTube for a lecture, and I found a lecture by Dr. Robert Lustig called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. I watched that video, and 6 months later, I was 100 pounds lighter. And that's just because he talks about how your body processes sugar. He shows you how it happens. It's pretty non-controversial stuff, and what I mean by that is you can go into biology textbooks and confirm the stuff he's telling you. And we've sort of known for a good long time that processed sugar is really bad for you. It's just this is America, so there was a successful effort by the industry to blur the lines on that, to blame saturated fat, or fat in general, instead of sugar. And a quick thing about that is there's a thing called non-fatty alcoholic liver disorder, and why it's called, non-alcoholic fatty liver disorder, and why it's called that is up until a certain point, all these people were suffering from liver failure because they were alcoholics. But more and more cases started popping up in children who definitely weren't drinking, and it's because the sugar is going to their liver, it's messing up their hormones, specifically leptin and insulin. It's making them eat more food that's unhealthy. The food produces liver fat. In my experience, before I found out this information, I tried to lose weight a couple times. I was never satisfied. I was never happy with my weight, and what that meant growing up, and what that meant I could or couldn't do in relation to other children. And the first couple times, one of the times that I was sort of hardest on it, I was eating what I thought was well. I was like steaming a lot of my food, and I was running a ton. I was running, let's see, maybe 15 miles a week, and I was like 275 pounds. I didn't really get much lower than that time when I tried. And why that is, pretty much the only concentrated sugar I was still eating was just a little bit of cane sugar every day in my coffee. I drank two iced coffees a day, and that was enough. And that's about all it takes. And that's sort of a big way you can figure out maybe it's not a calorie issue, it's a quality of the calorie issue, and it's a hormonal issue. And there are reasons you can look into hormonal theory of weight loss. You can look at the history behind that, and I won't get too much into that. And there's a book called, I think, Pure, White, and Deadly about sugar, written in the 70s, talking about a lot of these issues. So it's definitely not a fad. And why I think this is so important is, I said in a previous video, I think a lot of times people have political opinions. I think the attacks on Trump are a good example of this. Is people make these physical attacks because they're not confident with their reasoning. They're not confident with their reasoning because they're not confident with themselves, and they're not confident with themselves because they're not happy with how their bodies look, or with how they feel, or whatever. I distinctly remember thinking that every year I was going to get heavier, every year I was going to get more health problems, and that was just how it was, and there was nothing I could do about it. I remember accepting that as reality. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people who have made similar concessions to what they think is reality, and that really sucks. And it is really problematic for the whole generation. Lots of people my age struggle with weight. One thing I have noticed is recently, people seem to really not be having too much trouble. A lot of people seem to be figuring the sugar stuff out. The awareness of that has really spread since 2008, which is when I saw it, when that video was published and when I saw it. One thing, if you think about fashion, for instance, fashion is to make you look better. Why do you want to look better? You want to look better maybe to feel better about yourself, but honestly, I think you want to look better having something to do with attracting a mate. And if you have if you have a whole situation where no one's happy about the way they look, and you can just sell them fashion, sell them more and more disposable clothing, and that's a really good way to control people. So you have this thing going on right now where people who aren't even overweight feel horrible about their bodies, and that's because you were told you were ugly. You were showed the most attractive people in the country constantly, on a constant basis. On advertising, you see very, very deviantly attractive people, and that is what you grow up to. If you're watching, maybe you're a kid, you're watching the Disney Channel. That's who you're seeing on the Disney Channel, and you're not building an expectation of realism. And this is a thing that, like, I've noticed guys on a particular side. So I said this in the audio that was cut off. I think a lot of politics right now are basically based on a gender divide, based on and I think they're both a lot of it is wrong, but it comes out when you hear how these people talk. There's this guy named Gad Sad, and he made like a generic example, and he made it really personal, and it's very strange how some of these people sort of perceive the world around them. I saw one person saying, I think it was because he was trying to fight back at what I just said, which is that people's ideas of beauty are based on cultural norms instead of like a hard beauty. We do know people with more symmetrical faces are more attractive, but it goes a lot deeper than that, and he oversimplified the issue, I think probably intentionally. I've also seen people saying there's no such thing as rape culture. Go to fucking college. Or don't. I don't mean to disparage you for not being able to afford college. You don't have to afford it, though. Just go sit in some classes. Like, it is so false. I mean, the culture, the university culture, in so many ways. And that's the thing, is it's not like it goes hand in hand with the bullshit. It goes hand in hand with the shutting people down and the political glad standing and all that bullshit. Because if nobody can talk about what's really happening, and if you have people getting fired over Halloween costumes, you're not. Guess what? Like, this is what you're focusing people on. This is what's getting attention, and then rape culture continues unabated, and you've just helped distract for it. You've helped play interference. And so if you think these things are real and you think they're problematic, then you want to change people's minds, and then you want to understand their arguments. And that is the street. That's the way it goes. We can't force other people in different parts of the country to think the way we think for no good reason. We can't just say, this is better, we figured it out, trust us. It's not going to work. And it's not working, and it hasn't been working. Yeah. So that, and I guess the big thing, one thing I wanted to be more specific on, as I said, it's not because you're eating too much food, it's not because you're not doing exercise. And yeah, when you look at weight loss, it seems like the things that really determine the effectiveness of the regimen or the regimen is the diet. And working out helps, but working out alone, you're not going to lose weight. Changing your diet alone, you will lose weight. One of these is a more determinative factor. I mean, it's, if you're not eating unhealthy food, it's very hard to gain weight. I've tried. You just don't absorb calories you don't need to absorb. The adipose tissue is coming from that reaction I was talking about with fructose hitting your liver. It's not coming from like dietary fat or because you're eating a second helping of, I don't know, stir fry. I don't know what people eat. I only eat stir fry. So, yeah, and I think it's a really central point of identity for people, their bodies and how they feel about them. It's a really central point of how we deal with the world. And I think if you want to reduce the amount of control that people have over you, which should be the position of an anarchist or the position of a... Oh, that reminded me of something I wanted to talk about. The position of an anarchist or the position of a socialist should basically be that workers should have control over the excess. Workers should have control. Not oligarchs. And oligarchs control the messaging. Oligarchs tell you you're fat. Oligarchs tell you you're ugly. And it's not that simple. It's not as simple as Charles Koch sending out, a memo to call people fatties. But in a lot of ways, advertising, when social science abdicated studying racial and gender differences, advertising said, fuck yeah, we're in on that, and, they blasted full steam ahead. So there is a university field that studies gender differences, and it's advertising, and they do a good job of it. They are very good at selling stuff to people, and selling stuff specifically to women. Women are the largest consumers in the country. The thing I want to talk about relating to anarchists, real quick, is there's this website called, I think it's the name of the website, it's definitely the name of the organization, It's Going Down. So a couple things. One of these things is it recently got a little bit of notoriety because a woman named Lauren Southern got banned from Patreon for ostensibly supporting an organization that could be violent, maybe in the future. And It's Going Down has calls to action where they encourage people to be violent. And one thing is, since I've gone back and tried to find some of those calls of action, it seems like they've been removed from the site. But it could just be the Web 3.0 navigation system the site uses that tripped me up, and not self-censorship. But a lot of people pointed this out. I'd be surprised if there wasn't self-censorship on that level. So yeah, It's Going Down. This is supposed to be an anarchist website so people can communicate with each other on direct action, and you can #resist, and you can make a big difference, and you can fight back at the oppressors, and they call each other comrade, and it is a trap. If you are an anarchist, it's a trap, and you are a fool for falling for it. If you are a socialist, it is a trap, and you are a fool for falling for it. It's a website. There's a thing called the darknet, first of all. If you're actually trying to be, like, badass rebels, don't do it on a website. And that is why these people are just trying to fleece money off of you. These people are trying to make a job out of this. Like the SPLC or whoever. They don't care about the politics. If they cared about the politics, it wouldn't be an internet network. It is an absurdity. And so you have the position of there's a website for people to make money off of, and it is calling for violent action against people. Specifically, the article I read suggested finding out where cops lived and their use of history, and then arming yourself with guns, and then finding other victims of police violence, and then not letting these cops get away with it at any cost. And that should land you in jail. In a free society with freedom of speech, the only exception is rallying calls to violence, and that is one of them. And it is so damaging to your political position if you allow that front and center. And that's about what I wanted to talk about for that. There's stuff in the discussion on Orwell and on honesty, that I'm not sure what I said that was recorded and what I said that wasn't recorded, so I'll probably revisit some of these topics next week. Yeah, sorry about that. I sort of expected something like that to happen eventually. It's not the end of the world. That stuff can be re-said. But yeah, I mean, one thing back to Orwell that I did say, I do know I said before and I didn't repeat myself. When you read Orwell and you evaluate his work and you try to evaluate his character, the things he was concerned about, the ways he wrote, make you think that he was a man of exceptional ethical character. And to disprove that, you'd have to find things he did that go the opposite way. It's been decades and decades, and this does not seem to be the case, that he was a secret imperialist. If you, in this discussion of external reality and relativism and ethics, if you find yourself on the opposite side as Orwell, if you find yourself intentionally making your language more vague, controlling the discussion by controlling the language, doing the sort of stuff that he found deeply problematic, if you are on the wrong side of Orwell, your ideas might be questionable. And he's not an authority. He didn't ever set himself up as an authority, but by reading his work, you can understand the things that have been constant in politics, the things that have changed, the things that people have claimed are intransigent, like in Politics in the English Language, where he points out that people are saying that language is something that changes on its own and there's nothing you can do about that, and you hear that all the time today, and he says that is not the case. And for me, that was the first time I'd ever heard anyone say that. And it was also the fact that he was saying it in the 30s or the 40s was enormously important to me, because and when you study other languages, you understand that you can, in fact, control a language. Look at French. You really can control where the words go and how people use it. You can standardize a language. You can educate people in a language. We have a standardized language. We just don't standardize it on purpose. And that... Okay. Yeah, so I'm finishing up now, and this is going a little bit differently than it did last week because of the audio problem. I guess, if this seems a little fragmented, my takeaway is that to get yourself... is that self-criticism, criticism of the group you're in, criticism of your ideas, of what you think is sacred. This is the way to self-improvement, and this is the way to improvement of the polity. Otherwise, you're just going to be a manipulatable statistic. You're going to be a member of a group. You're not going to have the autonomy. You're not going to have the full measure of autonomy that, as like a responsible political individual, you should have. Like I said, I'm going to go back and see what I missed with the Orwell. There's a lot of... yeah, there's some topics I will cover next week that got cut off this week. The flower's starting to look good. This stuff's going to be black. These splotches right here. This stuff is starting to really vary, which is nice. This stuff over here, we're starting to get some contrast, and that's what it's about, is getting contrast. And I think a couple videos from now we'll probably mix up that 2-color black and try that out. But I think next time I'm going to lay down more magenta, maybe mixed with another color to make it look a little different. But the flowers I'm working off are just so magenta. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that, truncated and modified as though it was. And don't let Bob Ross's ghost get you in your sleep, because he's always looking. Have a good day.